name's Brent Chevront, in case people don't know me. And I just want to first off welcome everyone. Great crowd. We're very, very pleased that this many people have shown up for the storytelling. We want to thank everyone for coming here. Thanks for Leeds to host this event. And now I get to do something that I've always wanted to do. In case of fire, you all go out the doors from which you came, okay? Except for some people, you all can go in the back and just burn, okay? Burn. Let's see. Thank you. I also want to tell everybody, of course, at Leeds, they offer so many different types of events. This November, be sure to look at it. It's the Newsies Junior. It's a children's play. And I normally come to every play that they have here at Leeds. And after every play, I think they cannot up their game anymore. And they surprise me, and they up it every time. I've told people that Broadway has nothing on our Leeds. So let's give them all a round of applause. The different education that they offer, I'm taking tap dancing lessons. So if we get bored in some of these storytellings, we can just kind of do a little tapping for you, okay? So we are here today for several reasons. First, to celebrate the first year anniversary of the WinCity Media doing all of their stuff. Second, we're going to be celebrating how storytelling just gets us all together. And, was that second? Third, we're going to celebrate the newer, bigger, better things that are going to be coming to WinCity Media, but that will all be announced at the end of the event. And they don't have a fourth, but I thought fourth was surely to come see me tonight, so I guess not. To kick off the night, we're going to have Pete Toulis, right? Is that right? Pete Catoulis. I forgot the T. Sorry. Catoulis. Sorry about that, Pete. I hate when people mess up my last name, too. So, Pete is an IT professional working in Lexington. He's formerly from Campton, but we forgive him for that. He and his wife now live in Winchester, Kentucky. They've been here since 2015. Pete is a former weekly newspaper publisher and columnist for the Winchester Sun. These days, when not working, he can be found out on his back porch, reading or writing, or in his backyard, tending to his tomato plants, or puttering around in his garage or workshop. Pete's story tonight is called Rocket Boys. So let's give Pete a round of applause.
How are y'all doing? Man, I'm just blown away at how many people have come out tonight. Thank you all so much. We're so happy to see you. So happy you're here. I don't usually get nervous at these things, but I'm a little nervous for some reason, so y'all bear with me, okay? In the summer of 1972, the Apollo space program was winding down. After successfully landing 10 men on the moon and returning them safely to Earth, only one final mission, Apollo 17, remained. To a 10-year-old boy living in a small town in eastern Kentucky, nothing could have been more exciting than following along during the glory days of the American manned space program. As soon as school dismissed for the summer, my two best friends and I began laying our plans. My family had moved to Campton when my parents bought a restaurant, which included an attached apartment in the back. Next door was a furniture store owned by Kenny's parents, and Charlie's family lived on a nearby street. It was in a big field behind the Baptist church where the three of us discovered one another. All we ever called it back then was the field. It was where we played football in the winter, baseball and wiffle ball in the spring and summer, and basketball in the fall. There we played and fought and camped out and caught crawdads along the muddy Swift's Camp Creek that ran behind the field. There we dreamed and schemed. There we did things we weren't supposed to do, things like playing with fireworks. What is it about blowing things up that brings such a thrill to the hearts of boys? We blew up model cars, army soldiers, action figures. Pretty much anything we could get our hands on was subject to arbitrary and capricious acts of demolition. One of Charlie's favorite uses of them was blowing apart plastic football players from his electric football game. It had to be done, y'all. They were underperforming. Lots of things were on our minds that summer. Baseball cards, wiffle ball, camping out, and playing Monopoly and Rook on rainy days. But foremost in our minds that summer were fireworks and the Apollo moon landings. Let's just say the fireworks fizzled. When my dad found out that we had managed to get our hands on several bricks of firecrackers and bottle rockets, he put the kibosh on my participation. And after a couple of phone calls, my friends' parents did the same. Now, Charlie is the one who actually had possession of the illicit ordnance. His dad had secured them away in the smokehouse, a country word for an outbuilding that may once in generations past have been used for the actual smoking of meat. By then, it was mostly a place to store everything from Christmas decorations to lawn and garden equipment. As we rummaged through the contents of Charlie's smokehouse, Kenny made a momentous discovery: several small bags of what appeared to be gunpowder. "Hey, Charlie," Kenny exclaimed, "is this what I think it is?" "Yeah," Charlie said matter-of-factly. "My dad uses it to reload hunting cartridges." We all looked at each other. Firecrackers are child's play when you have access to pounds of pure powder. "Hey," Kenny said, "I know what we can do. We can build the world's biggest bottle rocket." "Or," I offered, "we could build a real rocket and we could all go to the moon just like those NASA astronauts." We all laughed. Only I wasn't laughing quite as hard as Kenny and Charlie. Okay, I may have misled you all a little bit about who I was at 10 years old. Oh, I really did enjoy the ball games and campouts and sleepovers and fireworks and all the rest. But I was also a bit of a loner at times. Actually, I was most comfortable by myself with a good book. I spent a great deal of time at the Wolfe County Public Library, where Mrs. Adams or Mrs. Brewer would help me find books about things that interested me. I liked the Hardy Boys and a lesser-known series of the same genre, known as Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. I'm not sure what Alfred Hitchcock had to do with the books. I think he wrote an introduction to each one, or maybe someone using his name did so. It was really about the three boys, about our ages, who investigated all sorts of crimes and alleged supernatural occurrences. I sometimes pictured those boys as me and Kenny and Charlie. One was a jock, that would be Charlie. One was just a normal kid, sort of the common sense one. No, that wasn't me. That would be Kenny. One of them was the brainiac, who I envisioned as me. I also loved books about science, about history, and especially about anything related to outer space, from astronomy to space exploration to stories of ancient aliens. I was up for any of it. But I was absolutely spellbound by what was happening then and there, the Apollo moon missions. I have a vivid memory of staying up late the night of July 20th, 1969, to watch Neil Armstrong take those iconic first steps on the moon. I still get chill bumps just thinking about it. I was watching with my dad on a tiny black and white TV with poor sound. When Neil said those famous words, I couldn't quite make them out. What did he say? I asked my dad. I'm not sure. Something about a small step and a giant leech, I think. But be sure to read about it in the paper tomorrow. In 10 years, school kids will be memorizing those words. My dad was a brilliant man. Now, it was against this backdrop that I went home the night of the smokehouse meeting and laid in bed for hours contemplating what I had said in the smokehouse. Now look, I was a kid of 10 and I was admittedly a science geek and a dreamer. But even in my wildest dreams, I didn't really think we were going to build a rocket to the moon. Why, NASA probably spent more money than my parents made in a whole year to build those rockets. And even if I saved my $2 a week allowance till I was in college, I still couldn't build a moon rocket. But what if we could build one that would at least carry one of us up just above the clouds, like our bottle rockets, high enough to look down and see all of Campton, heck, maybe all of Wolf County. So the next day, I got up early and got myself down to the library. In those pre-internet days, the library was the best place to seek knowledge. Spoiler alert, it still is. Anyway, I left there with an armful of books about rocket science. And later that day, we had the first meeting of the official Rocket Boys Club, with Kenny presiding. I think it went something like this. Kenny, guys, can we really do this? Me, I think we can. Charlie, I'm late for supper. We had many more meetings in the ensuing weeks. I'll spare you the boring details. It all came down to this. I had read that you could mix gunpowder with sugar to make a solid rocket fuel. Yeah, I know. Stay with me. So I could repurpose an old water heater we'd found at the junkyard for the engine. We just had to find something for the payload compartment. Payload, that would be us. Now at this point, I think I know what you all are thinking. Even at 10 years of age, surely you boys didn't really think you were going to go up in a water heater full of gunpowder and sugar and fly above the clouds? And even if you could manage that, how would you get back down safely? Was there any room in your minds for doubt that you could really pull this off? And most importantly, where were your parents? Look, there's only one thing I know for sure about most of you folks. If you're an adult, or even if you're a teenager, at one time in your life, you've been 10 years old. Do you remember? At 10 years old, literally anything is possible. Also, at 10 years old, our minds have this extraordinary capacity to entertain absurd ideas that we would never, if we were being completely honest, we'd never admit that. But we don't do that. At 10 years old, we still believe in magic. Sometimes I think adults could learn a thing or two from 10-year-olds. So all during that summer, as we were working on that old water heater, drawing up plans for our rocket, I know that deep down inside, none of us really thought we would ever launch that thing. But that's how you play make-believe at 10 years old. You never admit that it's make-believe. You just keep the fantasy alive. You breathe new life into it every day. It consumes your waking hours, your sleepless nights, and your dreams. You become the fantasy. Needless to say, the Rocket Boys never left terra firma that summer. But we never admitted defeat, never pointed fingers and said, I told you so. We went back to school in the fall, and we moved on to touch football and bonfires and jumping in piles of leaves. And something we were only starting to notice for the first time, girls. Nobody ever spoke of the moon rocket again, but for one incredible summer, we were the Rocket Boys of Campton. And what a magical summer it was. Thank you.
That was just fantastic. Very enjoyable. Our next storyteller is Jeff Brandt. Jeff has been a music fan since the age of 7. When the album Meet the Beatles hit the streets, he grew up in Hoptown and went to college at UK. He went a couple of times. He retired at 2016 and is currently amassing his music collection. Jeff says he loves being retired, but is tired of quarantining. His story is COVID, YouTube, and WCNNV. Jeff?
Well, I've thought a lot about what I wanted to say tonight, but I'm not really a storyteller, but I like to tell the truth. But I am terrified of public speaking. Are any of y'all, how many out there like to speak in public? Anybody? Aaron, yeah. Ron? I hate it, and I've never been able to overcome it. I've done it several times in my career, and I've never gotten over the fear. And how many of y'all would rather choke on a chicken bone than speak in public? Me too. So anyway, I'm gonna try to just talk about some of the things that have gone on in my life. Recently, how many people have aged about 10 years in the last 3 years? Oh, I hope this doesn't go on. So, yeah, I'm surviving still. I have lived a charmed life my whole life. The first half of my life, I was surrounded by friends and family that always took care of me when I screwed things up in my life, and I did that quite often. And then the last 30 years, I've been with Adra, my wife, and she's been the best companion of anybody that I know of who has a companion in their life. And she and my family have just really taken care of me over the years, and I'm really appreciative of that. Last year, I had been retired for a few years, and Pete and Chuck came up with this harebrained idea to do an e-zine in Winchester. And we were sitting around at a discussion group about a year ago, and they brought up the idea of what they were going to do. And, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, that sounds pretty interesting. And then Adra jumps in and says, Jeff knows more about music than anybody I know. And so she volunteered me to get involved in this. And actually, I am so happy that she spoke up and did that, because I wouldn't have, you know, I hate speaking in even small groups. But I jumped into it, and I have done nothing but play rock and roll, rock music, pop music at home to put these little blogs together each week. And I don't know how many of you have actually read and listened to my little blog. Good. Keep it up. You know, one thing that I've noticed over the past year is I'm a very anxious person, very anxious. I go to a therapist to talk about my anxiety, and she gives me a lot of good advice. But what I've found over the past year is if I sit back and listen to an album all the way through and try not to think about anything else, just listen to it and really get into it, and it's like taking drugs for me. And believe me, I know what taking drugs is all about. But my hope is that you guys will take an hour maybe every week and sit back and listen to an album and just do that and see if that makes you feel better. Because, you know, we've been through some terrible times in this country lately, and it doesn't sound like it's going to get much better anytime soon. Again, I'm glad to see you all here, and Mr. Chairman, I will yield the rest of my time to the gentlewoman from Winchester.
Thanks, Jeff. How many people still have albums? God, am I the only one not? God, I guess that's the popular thing. There's still food down here during the talks or whatever. Feel free to come and get you all some more food. The cupcake the cheesecake lady, something. I made the croissants so. Anyway, the next person to speak is a dear friend of mine, Joyce Morton. Joyce is a wife, a mother of 3, a grandmother of 8, and she's very active in our community. Her story is, "Where's my GPS?" Joyce Morton.
Hello, everyone. You know, there are some of us that are called directional challenged. Some of us, not all of us. I remember receiving a call in the office one day. This guy called and said, I just flew in, and I'm in Lexington, and I have an appointment with your boss. Could you please give me directions how to get to Bluegrass Station? I looked around because I know how it is for me. Everybody in the office were busy. So I said, all right then, hold on just a minute. I tried to think. He said, okay, I'm ready now. And so I said, well, you leave the airport, you get on 75, you get off and get on 64, and then when you see the sign that says Bluegrass Station, you turn right, and then you turn left. He was kind of laughing. He said, well, ma'am, are there any signs? Can you just give me something else? And I go, no. I told you, you get off 75, you get on 64, and then you come to Bluegrass Station. So he says, okay, how did you get to work this morning? I said, I left my house, I got on 64, and then when I saw the sign that says Bluegrass Station, I turned right, and then I kept on going right. So he said, ma'am, can you please put somebody else on the line? And by that time I looked up, all my office mates were laughing. I go, what is wrong with this? I told him what he asked me. So they told me, Joyce, you don't have a GPS that works anywhere. Please do not give directions on this phone again. And that's how I am. My husband never asked me, like, where I've been or anything, because I don't know. I don't know those signs. That made me think of Peter Bruner. I found out about him at the museum. I saw his play here at Leeds. I read his book, and I cried every time because I knew how it felt when you wanted to go right and you end up going left. So Peter Bruner wrote a book, A Slave's Adventure Towards Freedom. And I go, why would you even say adventure? A slave's adventure towards freedom? Peter was born right here in Clark County in 1845. His enslaver was his father, John Bell Bruner. He was such a cruel, cruel man. At 10 years old, he took Peter and his sister to Irving, to the plantation up there. At an early age, he had so much abuse and misuse by his father. I remember reading the book, and it said that Peter would be beaten, not whipped, but beaten, if the wash wasn't white enough. Peter would stay up all night beating corn, and if the hominy was too thin or if it was too thick, John would beat him. It had to be that he must have looked like his father. He never called him father. He always said, my master. But it was so hard to think that that was his child. One day, it was Christmas time, and the slaves were happy because at least at Christmas time you got something nice. John started to drink, and he didn't need a reason to beat Peter, but he looked at him. And Peter knew that look, so he started running. He ran into the tannery. He picked him up and threw him in the tannery. And every time he tried to get out, he kicked him back in. And he tried to drown him. And he got out. So this was his daily life. But Peter said one time he may have needed 100 lashes, but I don't think so. Someone gave to Peter a skin cat, But he told Peter it was a skinned rabbit. So Peter sold that skinned rabbit. And everybody said it was the best liver that they ever tasted. But when he got home, everybody was upset. So he got 100 lashes at the whipping post. This was daily. So Peter said, all right, I know I'm just 11 or 12 or whatever, but I've got to get away. I've got to get away. So early in the morning, he looked out among the stars and he got that GPS going. And he walked 21 miles. And he was in Richmond. Peter, you're not going south. You're supposed to be going north to to freedom. Oh my goodness. I've been looking for this. Honey, I found it. I don't know where it was. I wrote down some notes and I stuck it here. And I don't know where it came from. I'm like Peter. So he ended up walking those 21 miles, and then he got on the road to Lexington. He strutted around town, oh, freedom, I'm going north. I'm going to get my freedom. Well, he didn't. He saw an empty train, and he said, it's got to be going north. So he climbed inside, and he waited. And he waited, and he said, well, I guess it's not going anywhere. So he got back out and walked around Lexington. And the slave catchers caught him and had to take him back to Irving, to John. That time he only got 150 lashes. His blood dripped on the floor. But he did what he was told to do, and he kept on. He asked his dad, kill me. Don't keep treating me like this. Just kill me. So he hired him out. And Peter says, it's got to be better than living with my master. But he was wrong. He was worse. So one of the other slaves named Phil, they got together and they decided, hey, we're going north. We have to get our freedom. So they made their plans, and once again they started out in the darkness of the night. And for real, this time they Mount Sterling, Flemingsburg, Sharpsburg, Cynthiana. They were going north. Oh, he was so excited. And then they were so exhausted. So they slept that night in a barn, one day away from the Ohio River. And the slave catchers caught them again. And they didn't have anywhere to put them, so they were keeping them in a building, 3 stories. And during the night, Peter said, throw me out the window. Don't take me back. Just let me die. Don't take me back. But they did. They had to take him back, because they had to pay $80 a piece for he and Phil, and they were going to work and work. So they came from Irving to get the boys. To make sure that they didn't run away this time, they put chokers around them, took off their shoes, and said, by the time you get to Irving, you'll have no skin on those feet. You're not getting anywhere. So they went back, and nothing changed. John's drinking got worse. And when they brought him back to the plantation, he just looked at him again. He didn't throw a rock or a brick. He threw a stone at his child and hit him in the head. So after about a year, he said, I can't stay. And the guys on the plantation said, Peter, you got to leave. You can't stay here. So one more time, he planned to go north. One more time, 21 miles, and where was he again? Richmond. Why in the world? But just by chance, he ran into a group of guys. They were going to Camp Nelson so they could be in the war and have their freedom. They were grinning and talking and joyful. So 21 miles more, 41 that day, they showed up at Camp Nelson. The soldier said, what are y'all doing here? Peter said, we come to fight the rebels, and I want a gun. I thought, do they really think they're going to give him some bullets to go in that gun? But after a week, they said, well, come on in. So after a week, they said, we are going to start a colored union, and you all can be in the army and fight. Things got a little better, but during that time, you know, he wasn't the only one that has frostbite or smallpox or was hungry. When his battalion took apples off the tree, they put him in jail, but he was hungry. So, but things were better. Things were better. So after 2.5 years, he mustered out. He had his freedom. And for the first time in 18 years, he saw his mom in Winchester. She hadn't seen him. She didn't even know if he was alive. He stopped by to see his mom. But they knew that he could not stay. John Bruner was in Irvine, and even though he had his freedom, he had to leave. So he left Winchester for the last time. He went to Ohio, Oxford, Ohio. He had family there. Oh, he was so glad to be there. And of course, the work was hard, trying to find a job, trying to make things work. But he did. Job after job after job. And in 2 years, he got married. Oh my goodness, he never gave up. After all he had been through, he never gave up. He was a handyman, he was a farmer, he was any job that he could find. And when the women's seminary burnt down, he began to work there at Oxford College. And later on, they merged with Miami University. And all the jobs he had there. I guess it's like right now, the girls during that time, it was an election, and they had a debate, and they asked Peter, they said, well, can't you say something? And he did. Because you know what, as soon as he got to Oxford, he went to school. He took reading, writing, spelling, and and geography. Now he knew how to do it. He took geography. East, west, where? So he did. And his speech was so wonderful. They put it in the Gazette Weekly, and he was in other newspapers. This man that was a slave. And they made him the official greeter of Miami University. The university was so pleased to have him on the campus that they gave him a suit with tails and a top hat so he could meet the visitors. He had a house now, a real house of his own. He had a family. He had 5 girls. He was so happy. But then there was no buts. When I finished reading it again, and I go, but Peter, your life was so hard. Why did you call it an adventure? Why was it an adventure to get what should have been yours? And he would say to me, Joyce, I was a slave. I was a houseboy. I was a handyman. I was a soldier. I wrote articles for the paper. I was the first black man to work at Miami University. I did all these wonderful things, and they were an adventure. So, oh my goodness, you're right. I mean, you're still alive. He said, all these things I was allowed to do through my pain, through my everything. It was an adventure to have a family that loved me. And then when I read on, it said that his name is on a plaque in Washington, D.C., the African American Civil War Memorial. That top hat today is at Miami University in a museum. Peter, the slave from Winchester, Kentucky. Wow, you're talking about an adventure? And then the year that he died, he was made mayor for today, 1938. And then he died at 93 years old. I said, Peter, oh my goodness, what an adventure. And now that I found this, I want to quote. Though my life has been one of many hardships, I feel there awaits for me a crown of righteousness, and I shall have rest forevermore. Peter, you found your North Star. You found it. You don't need a GPS anymore. Because he's free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. Peter, you're free at last.
Thank you, Joyce. Our next storyteller is Ron Kibbe. Ron grew up in southeast Baltimore, spent 3.5 years living in the high desert of California, and came to Winchester when his VW Beetle broke down here on a crossroad drive to Vermont. He has lived here and worked as a social worker since 1973 through his retirement at 2013. He remains very active in the community and volunteers at various boards, coalitions, and committees. His passion includes the woods, the nature, music, books, and classic movies, especially Laurel and Hardy. Yeah! And I say we're fairly lucky that his VW Beetle died here, because we got you.
I have to follow Joyce? That's not fair. I'm going to tell you, of course, the title in the program is A West Coast Adventure. And as was mentioned, I spent 3.5 years in the Mojave Desert out in California. And that was back in the early 70s, because I left there in 73. Now, back in those days, some of you may remember, people had nicknames and such, especially in California where I was living. And I had some friends out there. One was named Fat Freddy. He was a little big. One was named Country Joe. Nothing to do with the fish, Jeff. And interestingly enough, who's not a part of this story, my best friend to this day, who I met out there, he had a most interesting nickname. We called him Tennessee Tuxedo. He was from Knoxville, and when we first met him, he was wearing these like really weird two-tone shoes, you know, so he got stuck with that name, and he still answers to it today. My nickname, it wasn't anything glamorous like Country Joe or whatever. It was the Kib. And some people livened it up a little bit and called me the Kibster, you know. But anyway, one day, Fat Freddy and Country Joe were at my house, and we were talking about, Fat Freddy had a sister that lived in Portland, Oregon. And he was talking about, I haven't seen her for a while. I'd like to go see her. And we started talking and said, well, why don't we do a road trip? I've never been to Portland, Oregon. Country Joe'd never been to Portland, Oregon. We said, well, yeah, that'd be fun, man. So Fat Freddy had a VW bus, the old, as you may have seen in some of the pictures from the old days. But so we made the decision to make this trip. And we were going to drive over to the coastline, up the coast of California, and up the coast of Oregon, see the sights, and we did see some sights. I mean, we drove through the redwood forest, these huge sequoia. I mean, there was one, if you can believe this, there was a huge sequoia out there that, I don't know why, but somebody had cut a big hole in it and made a tunnel through it. And we drove through this tree, believe it or not. But anyway, we made this trip. We threw our sleeping bags, backpacks or whatever into the van, into the bus, and made this trip up the coastline. Well, when we got over into across the Oregon state line, we decided to veer off a little bit and go over to a park. It was the Crater Lake National Park. And we were going to camp that night there. Well, I remember when we drove up to the entranceway, there was a park ranger, and the park ranger says, "Now, boys, I need to warn you. We've seen some bears around here." And we're going, "Oh, really? Okay, But we thought, we probably won't see any bears, right?" So we drove into the park, set up our camp, threw out our sleeping bags, built a fire, had dinner, sat around, enjoyed, and it got dark. And so we decided to crash. Laid our sleeping bags out. I was laying here. Fat Freddie was over there on the left. Country Joe was over there on the right. We went to sleep. I woke up, I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was gazing up, well, just like right now, gazing up, seeing all these bright, are those stars, Brett? Seeing all these bright stars in a very black night and hearing the sounds of the woods at night. And I was just thinking how beautiful, how peaceful, how nice, how quiet. And then I heard something that was a little disturbing. And it brought me a little sound effect here. Thanks to Laura at Full Circle, I've got a little tea bag. But that's not what it sounded like. It sounded like this. And I thought, what was that? Sounded like something back there in the woods. You hear that, Brett? Something's back there in the woods, Brett. Check it. And then suddenly, what came to my mind was that park ranger. Boys, we've seen some bears around here. And I thought, nah, it can't be a bear, man. What you talking about? It sounded like it was getting closer. And then suddenly I hear, I thought, oh man, that's something sniffing. And I'm going, Freddie, can you hear me? Joe, can you hear me? And if he'd been there, I'd probably say, Brett, can you hear me? They didn't hear me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, is it a bear? Can it be a bear? And I hear, it's getting closer. And I'm starting to think, oh man, it's a bear. Okay, then I'm starting to think, okay, what are you supposed to do when you see a bear? Okay, what I remembered, the first thing I remembered was that you run. And I was always told, you don't have to be you just have to be faster than everybody else with you. And they were still sleeping, so I thought I had a shot. You know. But I thought, no, I don't know that that's such a good idea. And then I remembered, play dead. Bears don't eat dead things. They only eat live things, right? So I thought, okay, I'm just going to lay here. I'm going to be very, very quiet. I'm not going to move. I'm just going to stay really, really still, and it'll go away. And so I'm laying there. Now, by this time, I'm surprised the bear didn't hear my heart beating like that. Anyway, I was freaking out, needless to say. But I was staying quiet. I was going to be dead. That bear was not going to eat me because I was going to be dead. Of course, if the bear ate me, I'd be dead. But anyway, it's getting closer and closer. And by now, I am really, I was somewhat frightened, to be honest. So the next thing I hear is it seems like it's right on top of me. And then I feel a snout on the back of my head. Okay, I couldn't be dead anymore. I screamed bloody murder. I jumped up yelling and screaming and flopping about. That sleeping bag went flying. Fat Freddie, Country Joe, they're freaking, what is the matter with you? What you doing? What's the matter with you? And I said, there's a bear. And they said, what? You know, they grab the flashlights. They turn around and they shine it down. And what do you think I saw? It wasn't a bear. It was a big old dog, a big black dog. I mean, he was a big dog, not as big as a bear. And he was looking up at me like, what's the matter with you? And then the next thing, of course, by this time, Freddie and Joe are just giving me all kinds of stuff. The next thing I know, I look down and the dog is trying to get into my sleeping bag. So I said, get out of my sleeping bag, and it just kept looking up to me and saying, well, what's the matter with you, So finally, after they gave me way more than my share of grief over waking them up in the middle of the night, everybody sort of settled back down, and we laid down. And I laid down back in my sleeping bag. I rescued it from the dog. And the dog comes right up, lays right next, puts his head on my chest, and just looks at me, And I thought, okay, I can do this. I'll let you sleep there. So anyway, we went back to sleep, woke up the next morning, and the dog was gone. Well, the dog may have gone, but this bear story has lived on for years. And this is probably about the 175th time, maybe a little bit more, that I've told it. So I was glad to share it with you tonight. But you never know. Thank you.
I wonder how much you smoked that night. Okay. Our next storyteller is going to be Aaron Smith. Aaron wants everyone to slow down, eat real food, the cupcakes, and screw the cheese and fruit and all that stuff. Eat real food, move their bodies, go outside, hit a pillow, and a little earlier for a more purposefully exist. She is a published writer, yoga teacher, and a mindfulness coach. When she's not standing on her head or typing on her trusty laptop, you'll find her reading, playing guitar, enjoying a glass of bourbon, snuggling on the couch with her people and her pets. Let's bring Erin up with her story, The Glimmers of Hope.
Thank you, Brett.
How are you, Erin?
Good to see you. So I have a different mic. Everybody hear me okay? Hi, I'm Erin. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I am a yoga teacher, and before I owned a yoga studio, I was a school librarian, and I loved to tell stories. I think it's ingrained in humans to tell stories, to share stories, to listen to stories. Since the dawn of time, man has looked up and around and asked, why? How? Who? And what? So I want to share an old traditional creation story. So what the program says I'm going to tell, I decided not to. I'm in charge of the mic. I can change my mind. So this story is a creation myth, and versions of this story are found all over the world. There's a Native American story, there's one from East India, there's one from South Africa. The version I'm going to tell is Scandinavian. In a time before time, the world was a wretched, wretched place. There were no stories. There was no laughter. There were no colors, no music, no dancing, no poetry. It was not a great place to be. But way above the earth, there were two siblings, the sun and his younger sister, the moon. And they were best friends as well as siblings. And they had had amazing adventures all over the universe. The only corner of the cosmos they had not visited, you guessed it, Earth. Because why would you? It was so dark and cold, boring. But one day they grew so bored. The moon said, why not? Let's give it a chance. So Sun leaned down and said, hello, could someone please throw us a line? And someone did. A spider heard them, and he weaved a silver thread, strong and long, and he threw it up, and Sun caught it. And Sun slid down this long, strong thread, and he arrived. And the humans said, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. For they had never seen yellow or gold. There were no colors on earth. They said, you're so bright and warm. For the earth was only cold and dark. You are amazing, they said. And Sun said, take it all in. Gave him a little razzle-dazzle. Sun liked the compliments. He made himself a little bit bigger. He shone just a little bit brighter. And that is when Sister Moon decided to join the party. Now, if the humans thought Sun was pretty cool, when they caught sight of Moon, they lost their minds. Moon didn't look the way that the moon looks now. At this time, Sister Moon shimmered and glimmered with every color of the cosmos. Red and orange, yellow and green, blue, indigo, violet, every shade in between. She was something to see. Magnificent. And the humans, of course, forgot all about Sun and started to worship the moon. How do you think this made the Sun feel? Anyone? Yeah, real bad. A little bit mad, a little bit left out, and a lot jealous. And the more he thought about it, the more he seethed. And the more he seethed, the more he just couldn't stand that no one was noticing his razzle-dazzle anymore. So he hatched a plan. He waited until his sister was asleep, and then he snuck into her room. And one by one, he took every one of her colors, placed it in a bag around his neck. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and every shade. And then he was gone. The next morning, Moon woke up and went down to the river to wash her face. As she caught her reflection, she noticed something really terrifying. My colors, where are my colors? There was no shimmer, no glimmer, just pale. And she started to sob and to cry. my colors, where are my colors? And she cried and she wept all day. And she wept all the next day. And she wept for days and weeks and months. She cried so much, she flooded the riverbank. Her tears threatened to flood the entire planet. So the humans go to the sun and they say, you're going to have to do something about your sister. If she doesn't stop crying, we're all going to die. So Sun's like, okay, maybe if I go down to the riverbank, because I'm Sun, I could warm up this tear-soaked land. So he comes down to the riverbank, and his sister looks at him and notices something interesting. There's a bag around his neck that she'd never seen before. Now, show of hands, who has siblings? I have an older brother. Keep your hand up if you've ever taken something that belonged to your sibling, or they ever took something that belonged to you. So it didn't take her long to put it together. Sister Moons figured it out. You took my colors, she said. He's caught. She flies at her brother. They fight. They wrestle. There's yelling. There's punching. There's screaming. She has never been so mad. She reaches out. She grabs that bag around his neck. She yanks it and kapow! Every color goes flying out as the bag explodes. Blue flies up into the sky. Blue flies down into the ocean. Green flies to the trees. Green flies across the land. Red and pink and orange fly in every direction, raining down to color all the birds in the sky, all the fish in the ocean, every animal on the land. The humans look down and they're like, look at me, I'm wearing colors. What is this? And as their eyes took them in, their hearts opened up. And something amazing started to happen. They started to laugh. They started to write songs and poems and stories. They picked up instruments and started to play. They started to dance. They started to live. Now, Sister Moon saw this and her heart was glad. She was willing to give up her colors to make all the humans on earth so happy. But she was never going to forgive her brother for doing something so terrible. So when Sun flew to the top of the universe, Moon flew all the way to the bottom. And we now get to share stories. But to this day, you will never see Brother Sun and Sister Moon in the same sky.
Thank you, Aaron. And I wish some of my sisters and brothers would do that. But don't tell them, okay? Christmas is coming up. Okay, let's see. Our next storyteller, is it Harry? Oh, sorry, Harry. I was going down. I've lost my place here. I'm glad you came up, but I was about ready to introduce Mike. Our next storyteller is Harry Enick. Harry is a Mount Sterling native who has lived in Clark County since 1999. He has a passion for the past and has researched and written extensively about the history of this area. His story is Abraham Lincoln's birthplace. And you were probably around then, weren't you?
Well, I don't know how anybody could follow those storytellers. I was sitting back there in my seat and I was wondering, would anybody notice if I just went on home? But here I am, and I couldn't tell a story to save my life. So you're going to get something different, and I'm going to read you an essay that I called Lessons in Local History. Abraham Lincoln's birthplace. As every schoolboy learns, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, was born to Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln in Hodgenville, Kentucky, on February 12, 1809. Or was he now? Could that story be part of a fiction intended to hide the truth of Lincoln's real origins? I'm going to explore with you some of the alternative facts. Goff Bedford published Land of Our Fathers, the first volume in his Clark County history, in 1958. I've often wondered what kind of reaction he aroused by the following statement in his book. He said, Thomas Lincoln married a girl named Hanks who had relatives living in Clark County. This gave grounds to the theory that Abraham Lincoln was actually born in Clark County. In Bedford's second volume, The Proud Land, he added a longer explanation for the origin of this legend. His source was Lucinda Boyd. She was a Cynthiana author and daughter of the noted minister, the elder Samuel Rogers. And her book, called The Sorrows of Nancy, gives a very fanciful version of Lincoln's origins. And her father was one of her sources. He said Nancy Hanks was the illegitimate child of Lucy Hanks and a son of John Marshall of Virginia. And you may recall that Marshall was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The elder Rogers added that Nancy, in turn, also had an illegitimate child, a son named Abraham, who was born near Thatcher's Mill in Clark County on the Clark and Bourbon County line. When Lucinda Boyd came to Winchester to gather material for her book, she met Mayor John Garner, and he asked her, did you know Abraham Lincoln was born in Clark County near Thatcher's Mill? Intrigued, she went on to collect similar statements from well-known local people familiar with the story. Many prominent Clark Countyans swore they had heard that Abraham Lincoln was born out of wedlock near Thatcher's Mill in Clark County. Moving over to Montgomery County, Ms. Boyd collected additional versions. She attributed the following statement to a Mount Sterling judge. A prominent figure in the Kentucky legislature told me that a man had told him he was the one who married Nancy Hanks to Thomas Lincoln. And at the time of the marriage, Nancy's son Abraham was a boy large enough to run around. There was another Mount Sterling citizen provided a different account. Lincoln's mother's name was Nancy Hornbeck, and his father's name was Abraham Inlow. This was the traditional story in my family and in the Inlow family, he said. While this stuff sounds pretty far-fetched today, such rumors were widely circulated in Clark County in the 1800s. No one claimed to have any direct knowledge of these events. They had all heard it second or third hand from some trusted source. No actual evidence was ever produced. Well, Lincoln's law partner and biographer was William Herndon. He collected and published several other versions of these rumors. First, he found an anonymous letter written from Paris, Kentucky, just after the Civil War. The letter claimed that Abraham Inlow was a millwright, and while he was building Thatcher's mill, Inlow was intimate with Nancy Hanks and got her with child. Miss Hanks threatened a suit for seduction, and to hush things up, Inlow gave Thomas Lincoln $200 to marry her and take her off, which he did, over to the Green River country. Yet another version claimed that Inlow hired one Thomas Linkhorn to marry a pregnant girl named Nancy for $160. This Linkhorn was a shiftless, worthless man who worked here and there. He was totally without character and feeble of mind. Nancy, the wife, was delivered of a child in a little cabin that stood on the banks of Strode Creek. Thomas was said to have abandoned Nancy and the child and was shortly afterwards killed by a falling tree. After that, Nancy became a notoriously bad woman and later took up with a man named Hanks. Confused yet? Not surprising. In 1920, Lincoln historian William Barton wrote a 400-page tome called The Paternity of Abraham Lincoln. The book shredded these and other outlandish rumors about Lincoln's father and mother. First, he described Lincoln's 1864 re-election campaign as a particularly bitter fight. Since Lincoln provided so little of his family history, his opponents felt free to spread every piece of malicious gossip that came their way. These stories were especially harmful since illegitimate children of low birth were thought to be afflicted with weak intelligence and loose morals. By the time he was elected president, neither of Lincoln's parents were around to defend themselves. He lost his mother to milk sickness when he was only 9 years old, and his father died a decade before his election. The Clark County myths were not the only ones. William Barton listed 7 of the so-called sires of Abraham Lincoln. One of these was John C. Calhoun, the famous orator from South Carolina. Others included Henry Clay and Patrick Henry. Barton then proceeded to show that each one of these specious allegations is contradicted by overwhelming documentation in the historical record. The evidence for Lincoln's parentage is voluminous. Thomas Lincoln married Nancy Hanks in Washington County in 1806. The marriage record was not found until many years after Abraham's death. The first child, Sarah, was born in 1807. Abraham followed 2 years later in 1809, both born in Hardin County. Most scholars now agree that Lincoln's mother was the illegitimate daughter of Lucy Hanks, and Nancy's father has not been identified. Lincoln's reticence about his family history may have stemmed from his not wanting this to become an issue in the presidential campaign. In this vacuum, however, a vicious whisper campaign against him not only speculated on his mother's illegitimate birth, but also, even worse, on his own paternity. In 2007, Edward Steers published a book called Lincoln Legends. He asserted that all of Lincoln's detractors haven't yet gone away, and some still question his paternity. Dozens of websites continue to debate the issue. My Google search, Abraham Lincoln paternity, turned up hundreds of hits. I believe the story offers several cogent lessons for our time. First, there's nothing new about the big lie. The phenomenon has been with us through the ages. It's always been a weapon used by unscrupulous individuals to persuade, manipulate, and control others. The second lesson is that the big lies take on a life of their own. It doesn't matter how thoroughly they've been debunked by hard evidence, there will always be some who continue to believe. As Steers wrote, of all the myths associated with Abraham Lincoln, the paternity myth still ranks at the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Sounds like the Lincolns needed Maury Povich there to see who's the father. Y'all may not watch him, but I do. Okay, now our next storyteller. Sorry, up here. Mike Caldwell. Growing up in eastern Kentucky and southern Ohio, Mike is an award-winning journalist with nearly 2-decade experience creating contents for community and news organizations. He and his wife, Ray, lives in Winchester and with 2 teenage daughters. And his story is No Spandex Required.
I moved here almost 6 years ago today, and one of the first people that I met was Brett. And I met Brett and his puppy, and he said, "Hey, you know what? We're celebrities. Our picture's on the back of your building." And so that's what I remember. You know, as I was sitting there and I was talking with Harry about that, the original program had me going first. And so when we were talking about that, I was like, "Oh no, I don't want to go first." But then as I'm sitting there and listening to these storytellers, after every person, I'm thinking, "Man, I'm sure glad I don't have to follow Pete. Man, I'm sure glad I don't have to go after Joyce. Man, I'm sure glad I don't have to go after Jeff," and so on and so forth. And now I'm like, "Man, I wish I didn't have to follow Harry." So as the penultimate speaker, before we get to Chuck, how about we give all of our storytellers tonight another round of applause, because they've done an amazing job. So I'm going to tell you a little story about myself and how, you know, even the most unfortunate accident can have a profound impact and can shape your perspective for a lifetime. So as Brett said, I grew up on a farm in southern Ohio, the son of non-repentant hippies. I think they probably hung out with Ron Kibbe. You know, we had pigs, we had a goat, we had a ton of chickens, we had a pony. There was a little bit of agriculture, and I learned later that the cash crop was not tobacco. What we didn't have was an indoor bathroom. So I spent the first 10 years or so of my life navigating an outhouse, and I wasn't the smartest kid in the world, but I knew that really sucked. You know, but it was something that we worked through. We had a natural spring on the property. We did later get running water, but there was still no sewer system, so we would take baths on a partially secluded back porch, and we just kind of worked through it. But you know, this is not a sad story. It was an amazing way to grow up, and it's, you know, it was something that shaped me as a child. I ran through those woods, and I ran with our German Shepherd. I played in creeks. I swung on grapevines. I tormented the farm animals. I even rode the pigs. I'll tell you a little secret. They really don't appreciate it. You know, but this was a great way to grow up as a kid, and I think some of that's lost on current generations, certainly on my teenage daughters, I promise you that. And so we had a lot of time to bond as a family, and so there were many nights that we spent huddled around an old coal-burning stove. And it was there that my dad taught me how to read before I even went to school on vintage 1960s comic books. And that was where my love for storytelling and for journalism was born. Because in those comic books, newspapers were these amazing places and just awesome, magical things happened. But the thing that really sparked me and captured my imagination as a young child was those spandex-clad superheroes. And they did amazing things. They had value systems that you would aspire to as a young boy. And they really is just something that you connected with. And we spent lots of time reading those stories over and over and over again. And I grew a great appreciation for those superheroic efforts. But I knew that these were just windows into a make-believe world and that superheroes didn't exist. Or at least that's what I thought. Over the years, I've had lots of evidence to tell me otherwise. One of the earliest pieces of that was when we were still there on that farm. I was probably 8 years old. We were out cleaning up a campsite, and I was doing what 8-year-olds do, and I was not paying attention and not listening to mom and dad, and I fell into a old fire pit. Now the coals were long since cooled, but people had thrown glass bottles into the pit. So underneath those ashes was shards of glass. I sliced my hand wide open. I still bear the scar to this day. In my memory, blood shot out of my hand like a geyser at Yosemite or, Yellowstone. Yeah, thank you. So that in my head, that's what I saw. I was absolutely convinced I was going to die. I was just waiting for my hand to fall off. And then something crazy happened. It was like time slowed down. I looked at my father, and it was almost like the panels that you see in a comic book. He rushes towards me, and he rips his long john shirt off like the Incredible Hulk, swoops me up, and wraps my hand up and says everything's going to be okay. And so it was on that day that not only did my dad become my hero, but I also grew an appreciation that there are real superheroes in this world. I've been blessed in that 2-decade career in community journalism to meet so many other real-life superheroes. They can be hard to find sometimes. Certainly it's easy to pick out those in uniform. Our men and women in police, fire, and the military absolutely are heroes. But sometimes it's hard and you overlook some of the other everyday heroes. It might be the elected official who understands the true meaning of public service. It might be the business owner who puts himself at risk to take care of the underserved or the discriminated against. It might be the senior citizen who can barely make ends meet herself, but is always there to lend a neighbor a hand. And I've met all those people and many more. Some of you are probably in this room. Now I work with Shriners Children's Hospital in Lexington, and I see miracles every day. Our doctors and our nurses do amazing things, and they help change the trajectory of the lives of families. But more importantly, I see it on these kids' faces. The kids that we see and the kids that we take care of, they often, not all of them, some of them are just for routine treatment, but many of them face significant adversity. And they all share common traits of an indomitable spirit and smiles that just light up a room. And so to me, when you look at those, that's proof that there are real superheroes in this world. Ordinary people do extraordinary things every single day. They save lives. They make a difference. They change the world. And the thing that we all need to keep a hold of is that we all have that capacity inside of us. Each one of us can be those superheroes. It's not about what you wear. You don't need a fancy nickname. It's all about the small things that make our world better each and every day. And no spandex is required. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you, Mike. All right. Our last and least, our least but not last, or last or not least, is another storyteller, Chuck Witt. He's also one of the co-founders of the WinCity media. Chuck was a columnist for the Winchester Sun for 13 years. During that time, he produced 459 columns. He is the creator of Michael Tate, Assassin with Souls, and a creator of Jack and Me. He's also on a series called Walt and Ram. Chuck is a poet, an artist, a photographer, and an all-around pretty good guy. His story is Uncle Jim. Chuck.
I've been trying to figure out uncles all my life. My mother had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and between her and my dad, I grew up with 10 uncles. There were some days when you couldn't leave the house without bumping into or tripping over an uncle. Well, some of them drank, you know. So. But I finally figured out the character of uncles is that they're basically all crazy. You don't have to believe me. Ask Brett's nieces and nephews. But I had one favorite uncle, Uncle Jim. He was a farmer. And I tell you, when you combine farmer with an uncle, it takes you to a whole new level of crazy. But he was a kind-hearted crazy. He was also a heavy drinker. He could put away a carton of RC before lunch every day without batting an eye. One year he asked me to go along with him on a trip to St. Louis. He was going to a farmers convention. And I'd never been to St. Louis, so I agreed to go along and I'd do a little sightseeing while he was at the convention. And the first thing I ran into in St. Louis was that great Gateway Arch. Boy, it is magnificent, 630 feet tall. And I'm standing there in awe of this great thing. And I'm thinking, boy, wouldn't it be a hoot to slide down the outside of that thing? Although I think the sudden stop at the bottom would probably take the edge off the trip. But, and the last day of the convention, they had just blew a button. They had a social hour, open bar for all the convention goers. And Uncle Jim invited me to go along, even though I wasn't registered at the convention. He said nobody would notice because they'd all be drunk before the evening's over anyway. So I agreed to go along with him, and we were going up to the room, the banquet room that night. Most people were already in there. And they had a table at the front entry where you do your name tags. You know, those kind of paper kind where you write your name with a marker and stick it on your coat or your shirt or your coveralls or whatever you got going in. I got to thinking, if this was a nudist convention, I guess you could stick that tag about anywhere you wanted to. And it probably would hurt coming off too, you know. But so I told Uncle Jim I'd make out the tags for him because my writing was better than his. So I started writing his tag, and I wrote his name in as big letters as I could, G-Y-M. Well, it's a homonym. What difference does it make, you know? And we're going to be around drunk farmers all night, so they're not going to know either. And then I decided I would go incognito since I wasn't part of the convention. So I started writing out my name tag. And you know how when you start writing something and you think you got all the room in the world and then you get into it and you realize you don't? So you start making your letters smaller and smaller. And that's not working either, so you start curving it, you know, because the diagonal is longer than the straight across. And it took me a while to write Rumpelstiltskin in all on one tag. So we went into the room, and I was going to be incognito with that. I figured nobody would bother me with a name like that. We hadn't been in there but a few minutes, and this fellow walked up to introduce himself. He was wearing cowboy boots, a Stetson hat. He had a string tie. You know those ties where you take your bootlace off and you put it around your neck and tie a bow in it and just let it hang down. And his name tag said Alvin. And I was wondering, I wonder if Simon and Theodore are with him tonight. And he had a pin in his lapel that was in the shape of the state of Texas. And he walked up to Uncle Jim and he said, "I'm from Texas." And Uncle Jim, in his usual understated way, said, "Do tell." And Alvin said, "Well, where are you boys from?" And Uncle Jim said, "We're from Kentucky." And Alvin said, "Well, what kind of farming do you do there, Jim?" He was having a little trouble with his name tag, to be honest about it. And Uncle Jim says, "Well, I've got a few head of cattle, and I raise some tobacco and corn." And Alvin asked him how big his farm was. And Uncle Jim said, "Well, I've got about 90 acres. And he said, "How big is your farm, Alvin?" And Alvin says, "Well, you know, in Texas, everything is big, and we don't really think in acres. But I can put it this way. I can get in my truck at dawn and drive till dusk, and I'd still be on my farm." And Uncle Jim, in his usual understated way, said, "Yeah, I had a truck like that myself." And that was the last we saw of Alvin that night. And Uncle Jim said, "You know, I think we'll go up to our hotel room and hit the sack. I want to get out of here early tomorrow. I got to get back someplace where I can find me an RC." So I'm convinced now, knowing Uncle Jim as I did, that when he died, you remember how the ancient Egyptians, they always put the Pharaoh's favorite things in the tomb with him to make sure his trip to the next world was going to be nice and smooth. I think when Uncle Jim died that somebody sneaked a carton of RC in his grave before they threw that first shovelful of dirt over him. And I got to tell you something, I think an ice cold RC would be a pretty valuable commodity depending on which way you're going. Well, I tell you what, we've come to that part of the night when I know you all been waiting for it. We're going to have the big reveal. And I'd like to get Pete and the rest of the advisory board back up here with me so I won't feel so lonely up here. So come on up, folks, and let's wrap this thing up tonight. I'm going to ask Pete to yell because I'm not going to give him the mic. But
Hey, Chuck. There you go. We're going to keep this really brief because we've gone a little long tonight, and I blame Brett.
It was his job to keep us on point.
It was his job to keep us on point. He didn't do that.
We showed up late, so what do we expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to keep this fairly short. These folks that you see right up here, this represents WinCity Media. And it started with me and Chuck about a year ago. And I can't believe the quality of people, and not only these people up here, this is our board, this is our advisory board, but all of the great contributors that we've managed to get on board that share their writing, their artwork, their photography, their poetry, their just, fiction, just all kinds of great content. And we're just getting started, y'all. The future is very bright. So a few months ago, we started on this path of reevaluating who we are, what we do. We didn't really like the name WinCity News and Views because it sounded too much like a newspaper, and we're not a newspaper. we're a creative outlet for folks that have a voice that they want to be heard. And the voices are not just the people.
What was that part about keeping this short?
There's one in every crowd. So anyway, long story short, Chuck.
Too late.
Too late. We've got a new name. We've got a new logo. We've got a mission statement, a vision statement, and some core values that I want to share with y'all really, really quick. And on Monday morning, we're launching a brand new website. New look, a lot of new content, and we're always going to be adding more content because we feel like we serve a vital role in this community. We feel like we offer some alternative views and just a creative outlet. I'm not going to go on and on and on. I am going to say that a whole bunch of people had a lot of input into selecting a new name, and we are going to reveal right now. We want to reveal. This is our new logo designed by Rebecca Campomones, and we are now WinCity Voices. And WinCity Voices offers connection, conversation, and community. And that's what we're about. I just said Rebecca. Yeah. Oh, you want to?
No, making sure you did.
Yeah.
You want to take? No.
Are we coordinated or what?
We're winging this, guys. No, we're just about to wrap up. I just want to share one more thing with you. I want to share our vision statement, and then I want to share our 5 core values because this is who we are. We envision a community where diversity is celebrated and all are welcomed, inspired, and empowered to become active participants in the social and civic life of Winchester and beyond. And to support this vision, we have 5 core values: social justice, authenticity, giving voice, curiosity and creativity, and environmental advocacy. This is what we're going to be doing over the course of the next year and many years to come. And we're going to keep telling stories because that's what it's about, right? Anybody want to say anything? You want to say anything, Joe?
Haven't I said enough?
Anybody else?
One thing.
Go right ahead.
So as you guys leave tonight, out on the counter, make sure you grab one of the cards. It's got all of the different channels where you can stay connected with WinCity Voices. Got to get used to that. So make sure you grab one of those. And Pete really deserves a ton of credit because he's been working extra hard and burning the midnight oil on getting the website switched over. So I think we need to give him a round of applause as well.
Oh, I'm glad you said that because thank you, Mike. I do appreciate that. But these 2 ladies right here, LaShayna Harney and Sabrina Puckett, are the ones that are responsible for this night. It was their idea, their vision, and they've pulled it off. And I'm just so happy. I'm happy for you all to be here tonight. A lot of friends and new people that I didn't know before tonight. So thank you for coming out. We're so happy. We may do this again next year. Do y'all want to? Okay, we may do that. Good night, everybody.